morning, everyone. The picture that you can see behind me is one of the oldest churches in the world. It is about 1,500 years old, and it's located in a town called Malula, 40 kilometers from Damascus in Syria. As you can see, this church is totally burned and ransacked, and this act of destruction was done by the Islamist fighters from the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda. If you had been in this church before 2011, when the revolution in Syria started, you would have seen two holy paintings, icons, on each side of the altar. When I was in this church before 2011, the local tour guide told me that those two icons were donated by to the church by a Polish general that passed through this area in Syria with an army and tens of thousands of civilians. So I asked him, was it General Anders? And obviously it was him. So who were the Polish refugees that went through the Middle East? Those were people from the eastern part of Poland that was taken up by the Soviets in 1939. Those people, about 1 million, at least 1 million of our compatriots, were put in cattle wagons in 1940 and were transported to the Soviet part of Siberia and the Soviet Central Asia, where they were put in labor camps. In 1942, as many of you can recall, a Polish army was created in Central Asia. And this Polish army later on moved through Iran, Iraq, Syria to the territory of today's Israel, and later on fought the Nazis in northern Africa and Italy. This army was accompanied by over 40,000 Polish refugees. We were refugees, millions of us, many years back. Those 40,000 Polish refugees that went alongside with the army got an incredible welcome and hospitality in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, where we work right now, in many other places. Later on, those people were resettled all over the world. I lived in Zimbabwe once, and in Zimbabwe, which is in southern Africa, there are 2,000 people with Polish passports, and those are descendants of those refugees. Unfortunately, right now, our response to the largest humanitarian crisis we see right now after the Second World War is vastly different to this great welcome and hospitality our own compatriots received. Obviously, I'm talking about Syria. Obviously, I'm talking about the crisis in the Middle East. This civil war that started in 2011, which has ransacked the church, has also totally ransacked the country. 30% of the buildings in Syria are in ruins. About 6 million people have nowhere to live. The wars in Syria and wars in Iraq combined, creating a massive conflict that forced over 15 million people to flee their homes. This is a situation where by volume, this is the biggest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. And those people did not stay in those countries. They went to other places in the Middle East, inundating countries such as Jordan or Lebanon and Turkey with waves of refugees. Lebanon, where we work, is a tiny, tiny, tiny country, about the size of Kosovo or a quarter of the territory of Denmark or maybe 10% of the territory of Poland, which hosts 1.1 million refugees from Syria. If you compare this tiny country to Poland, which is 38 million, this is a situation as if our own country has hosted 9 million refugees from Ukraine or from another place in Eastern Europe. Our own country would not survive such a great economic burden, and neither can the countries in the Middle East. So who is a refugee? A refugee is not an economic migrant. Those are the two different types of people crossing the borders. Economic migrants escape poverty, escape bad living conditions. However, refugees are the people who are escaping terror, killings, and discrimination in their home countries. Refugee can be a man who is escaping his country because he's a threat of being arrested or tortured or killed because of his political beliefs. A refugee could be a woman who is escaping her country with the children because she can be killed, raped, or having her house bombarded because she belongs to a certain ethnic or religious group. Millions of Poles were refugees during the Second World War and in subsequent decades. And now over 5 million Syrians are refugees as well. So many people in Europe think that, oh, we help refugees by welcoming back them here. This is complete rubbish. Helping refugees, if we help refugees coming here, those are people who had money, who had sometimes even $2,000 per person to pay to people smugglers to cross the many boundaries between Syria and Germany, or between Afghanistan and Greece. The aid, the focus should focus on the poorest of the poor, and they are there close to the conflicts. One of those poorest of the poor is this woman living in this cellar. Her name is Maria. She's a 29-year-old refugee from Syria. She lives in this basement in Lebanon, and for this terrible place with no windows, she has to pay $150. She cannot afford it because she has no work, so she's selling her food in order to pay rent for this. This means that her children have no proper food, and she can feed them only with a tiny soup made of grass, herbs, and mushrooms that she can collect and find in local fields. If this family had been given a humanitarian aid package of $200 per month, she could get a better house and better food for her children. But this humanitarian aid is not enough. Or this woman, her name is Nibol. She is a citizen of South Sudan. She has 5 children, and her husband is missing due to the civil war. She has been trying to grow food for the last several years, but because of the drought, all the crops are failing. Right now, what she is holding in front of her, those are the tiny, tiny seeds of grass that she's trying to mill them in the flour and feed it to her children. But how can you feed children on grass? No wonder her youngest child is dying of hunger right now as we speak. And her other 4 children will probably not survive to the crops that come in August. If she had received a package of humanitarian aid valued $50, so what you spend for a dinner for 2, we could secure her a bag of grain of 50 kilograms and enough oil, sugar, and beans to last for an entire month for the entire family. Those are the differences we are talking about. In 2015, European Union was affected by the largest wave of refugees and migrants for the last many decades. Over 2 million people came to European Union borders. Where those people came from? Over 75% of people arriving into Europe through the Balkans were escaping the wars in Syria and Afghanistan. So those 2 wars, several thousand kilometers away from the European capitals, literally came to us. We cannot longer pretend to be living in ivory towers where the countries to the south and to the east of Europe are collapsing because of long-lasting civil wars, because of economic crisis. Several countries that you see on this map here, or this map behind me, are actually only existing on the map, because in reality they have fractured and splintered in a number of small, tiny statelets or fiefdoms that fight each other for the wars, some of them lasting 20 or 30 years. No wonder people are escaping such conditions. So perhaps we should wait for the people to arrive on our borders, and this is probably the worst thing we can do, because we have to focus and deliver aid to people as close as possible to their homes, because we are helping the poorest of the poor. And if people don't run away far away from their homes, they will always also one day go back and try to rebuild their lives. If you talk to people from Syria, from Afghanistan who arrived in Europe, well, they may even declare that they may one day come back, but in reality, we as humanitarian aid agencies really doubt they will ever go back. Those people who have severed the ties with their home countries probably will never go back home. Helping refugees, helping people affected by humanitarian crisis, the place where they come from, or in the next safe country, is many times cheaper than social aid packages for migrants or refugees in Europe. If we, for instance, take Germany, the package of social assistance that is provided to a migrant family in Germany, comprised of food, of shelter, of education and health, the expenses for this package could, with this money, the humanitarian aid agencies or the United Nations could provide really comprehensive humanitarian assistance to 5, sometimes to even 10 families in places such as Lebanon, Syria, or any of the countries of the sub-Saharan Africa. So for the 8 to 1 family, we could feed and shelter sometimes 10 more people. As a case in point, Germany in 2015 has spent 20 billion euros, so 90 billion zlotys, to provide social benefits and social assistance to refugees and migrants in Germany alone during 1 year. This amount for us as humanitarian agencies is a total shocker, because this is twice as much money which would have allowed aid agencies to provide humanitarian aid to every person in need in Syria and Iraq and in neighboring countries. So in fact, we could address the challenges there instead of dealing with them here in Europe. So what we can do? In this year, we're going to see a crisis with 2 levels. At one hand, we're going to see the continued war in Syria and Iraq, and those refugees are too scared and afraid to be going back. On the other hand, we are going to see the largest famine, which is like a catastrophic hunger, expanding from Nigeria in the west to Yemen and Somalia in the east. 20 million people are at threat of being affected by the hunger, and even as many as 4 million children can die of starvation this year alone. This means that by the time I'm on stage, and I can see my clock already ticking, about 50 children would have died of hunger in the same time. This is the level of catastrophe we're going to be facing this year. So we are asking for support. We are asking for generosity, because we don't have to wait for the governments to act. Every society in Europe has a tremendous fundraising capacity to assist those operations and to address crises out there before they come to us. If every one of us were to contribute only a few dollars of private donations, the aid agencies could assist both the Maria, the refugee in Lebanon who's collecting seeds and grass to feed her children, and Nibol in South Sudan, who is seeing her 5 children dying of hunger. We don't have to wait for the crisis to come to us. Let us help the poorest of the poor in the places where the humanitarian crises are taking place for a fraction of the price we would be spending on social benefits here in Europe. Thank you.
The question of coordination always comes up when we talk about humanitarian aid. And in case you guys haven't looked up Wojtek's bio, he runs a very large and professional humanitarian aid organization here in Poland. So he's the guy to ask such questions. The question of coordination comes up because, invariably there is, we're aware of massive numbers of activities. About 18 months ago, friends of mine in London began, within the tech community, began a thing called TEDxWarsaw. If you're into software and hardware and stuff, look it up. It's an amazing thing. We had a hackathon here in Warsaw 18 months ago or so. There are these groups of people doing good stuff all over. What is the one place where we can actually, is there a one place where we can go for information and for, to have our questions answered?
First and foremost, we have to know who's supposed to coordinate the humanitarian aid. And this would be either the authorities of the country where we are supposed to help those people, or the United Nations. In Europe, it's going to be obviously the authorities, the social aid and refugee institutions. In the Middle East, very often those are the agencies of the United Nations. So if you want to coordinate, you have to reach to them. You cannot pretend to be going and thinking that you're working in a vacuum. However, once you start talking to other people working in the same field, this is a great place to use data, to use cloud, to use computing. In Lebanon, where we work, the United Nations has a database of 250,000 Syrian families, where we can see name by name, family by family, who is helping them in what respect, over what time. This is a fantastic step forward, because right now we can really cross-check at the level of the individual household whether they get enough assistance and whether the next year or the next month they will be left with nothing. However, there is a great amount of goodwill, yes, but let's remember that helping people in need is much more effective in the places where they come from or in the first safe country, not even because of the cost, but because we're helping the poorest of the poor and we're helping those people who eventually go back home. This is what the refugees from Syria that we're helping are dreaming of, is to go back home one day. The challenge is that they're too scared even to think about it, and we are bracing with the situation that the crisis of the Syrian refugees may last another 10 or 20 years, and this would be a catastrophe.
I will leave you with that. Thanks, Wojtek.
Thank you.